again, as I said earlier, the technologies that we are attempting to reverse engineer we're running into many difficulties here precisely because the components are of extraterrestrial origin. Now, how would you ever be able to conclude that the components are of extra-dimensional origin? See, this is where you start to get into some strange territory. We don't even know what another dimension looks like. For example, I subscribe to hyperspace theory. Hyperspace theory posits that our physical universe, the one that we inhabit, the one that we're sitting in right now, is comprised of more than the three spatial dimensions and the one of time. You know, if you there are different theories out there that incorporate hyperspace, the hyperspace hypothesis. One of the most notable is string theory, which posits that there are at least 10 spatial dimensions that make up the fabric of our physical world. It's not these 5 are physical and these 5 are spiritual. That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't make any sense. There are 10, at least according to string theory, there are at least 10, or superstring theory, there are at least 10 spatial dimensions. Now, most of them are so small that they're not useful to us in regard to doing anything useful in them. But the point is that these are physical dimensions within the fabric of the universe. These are not extra dimensional in the sense that it's a different world. See, there's a conflation of terms here that I'm always trying to address. And part of our misconception, it's not really our fault. It's the entertainment industry. We have been thoroughly confused by the Marvel movies, for example, as it pertains to the multiverse and extra dimensions in hyperspace. Hyperspace, let's talk about hyperspace for a minute. There is a good scientific representation of hyperspace out there in Star Wars. Star Wars incorporates, I think, accurately the concept of hyperspace. When the ships enter into hyperspace, they access a lane in another spatial dimension within our universe that allows them to travel uninhibited and at greater speed, and it basically creates a shortcut. And there's you can look this up. That Star Wars was actually very accurate in their depiction of hyperspace. So that's the sort of thing I subscribe to. But then you take the Marvel movies and you start dealing with the multiverse and extra dimensions. So extra dimensional worlds or alternative universe or the alternative universe theory gets conflated with the multiverse and with hyperspace. Those three distinct scientific theories are all compressed together. They're amalgamated inside of these movies that we watch. And so we're all walking around with these concepts in our head that do not actually reflect the scientific theories. And in fact, these are separate ideas. So, for instance, I don't believe at all that we live in a multiverse. I think it's ludicrous. I think, frankly, it's stupid. This notion of a multiverse, that's ridiculous. If we were all standing together, let's say in my backyard, and we're looking up at the sky, and in broad daylight we see a portal open, we see something happen in the sky. Let's say a hole in the atmosphere forms, and it's this opening, and all around the edges of this opening is our sky that we're looking at, the clouds and our normal sky. But inside of this opening, of this essentially this hole that's penetrating through our sky, we see a different sky. We see a different atmosphere. What does that mean? What does that mean? What are we looking at if that's the case? It would be illogical to assume that we're looking to another dimension. That would not be the logical conclusion here. The logical conclusion would be that we're looking at a different part of our universe, or a different planet, or indeed a different part of the Earth, because we're seeing an atmosphere.
So the question is, why are they trying to program people to think different dimension first before, no, this is a lane to another celestial body in our own universe that we, do you understand what I'm saying? Why are they trying to conflate these ideas together and make us think extra dimensionality as opposed to the multiple? Well, it's the words suck because it's the same amount. It's multidimensionality within our universe if there's 10 dimensions, but extra dimensional in that multiversal usage doesn't mean the same thing as string theory does for dimensions. It means a separate universe. I'm
not sure it's intentional. I think it's easy for bad writers.
Yeah,
I think the multiverse. What do you call this? A MacGuffin, I think, is what it's called.
Yeah, MacGuffin. That's right.
It's easy. It's so easy. It's so convenient. Nobody really understands it. The public doesn't really understand it. So you don't have to be accurate, scientifically accurate. It's just such an easy narrative device to fall back on. Extra dimensional, multiverse. It's like, but nobody really understands what that means. So how would you differentiate? So we're looking up at that hole in the sky, and we're seeing another atmosphere, and suddenly 3 saucers come out of it. This is, by the way, a real story from a friend of mine. 3 saucers come flying out of it. But you're looking at a different atmosphere. How would you differentiate a different part of our universe or our planet from another dimension? How would you ever differentiate that?
I don't think you could.
What would the difference be? So what is the difference in the physics or the reality of an interdimensional world as opposed to ours? What's the difference? What is the difference?
If the saucers arrive and if they are real physical things, then in the immortal words of Hillary Clinton, what difference at this point does it make?
Precisely.
Because the point is, well, they're here, and whether I understand where they came from or don't understand where they came from, they're here. And what you're describing too, by the way, sounds an awful lot like Stephen in front of the council on, looking up and seeing, seeing heaven. And
that's right.
And that's not a different, I know you don't like the word supernatural, and I don't either. It's not like, well, that's spiritual, and what your friend saw is something. No, it's the same thing. And the fact that we don't understand how it works doesn't mean it's not real and valid and legitimate in our reality, even if our reality is a subset of a larger reality.
Yeah, and even if it is interdimensional, it's still part of the fabric of our universe.
Yeah.
Because this is where people conflate alternative universe theories or alternative world theories. So an alternative world or an alternative universe, which is a little bit different from multiverse, that is a world entirely distinct from ours. Like, it doesn't have the same physics. It doesn't, nothing should be very similar to our world. This is a world that does not exist within our universe. Okay. This is a world that's in a different universe, one that we can't even comprehend. This would be akin to Narnia. Although you could make the argument that Narnia is another planet, which C.S. Lewis kind of does, actually.
Yeah, he does.
Well, the wood between the worlds, right? By the way, where did the White Witch come from?
Mm-hmm. She came from
Charn, which is
she came from Charn. She came from another world,
Mars, actually. So
yes,
and I'm not saying that's a fiction, of course, but I think in Lewis's brain that was Mars. She came from Mars. I think there's very interesting.
C.S. Lewis knew something. I mean, we've concluded that again and again. Like, this guy, he knew something. He was on.
Well,
something.
He was thinking on a level, I think, that was. He was thinking in ways that would not have made him very popular in mainstream Christian society, were he to voice them frankly. And so he sort of cloaked these ideas in the fictional narratives that he wrote. But yes, I think he was thinking about a lot of this. And and I would also say Tolkien was, and that shouldn't be surprising because they were part of the Inklings, and they'd sit around and probably talk about these very kinds of things. So, so the point is, you see a portal open, you're looking on the other side. There's a different atmosphere. And by the way, these craft, these saucers, are flying through one atmosphere into another. They're not just blinking they're not just suddenly supernaturally appearing, right? They're flying. They're traversing from one atmosphere to another.
So there's a physical continuity between.
Is interdimensional on that side of the portal and physical on this one. That's not what's happening. It's the same craft operating on the same physics on that side of the portal as it is on this side. And I'm referencing in my mind a particular incident, by the way, and actually a set of incidences. Am I opposed to the interdimensional hypothesis? No. I just don't understand why people axiomatically reject the extra dimensional hypothesis, which is logical. And you can take a telescope, and of course the flat earthers will object, but you can take a telescope and look up and see Mars and Jupiter, and you can see Saturn and the rings of Saturn, and you can see the moons orbiting around these various planets. I've seen all of this through a high-powered telescope. And they look just like they look in the books, by the way. And you can see those planets. And there they are every night. You can walk outside your house without a telescope and see them gloss and shimmer in the night sky. You don't have to like twist your brain into a pretzel to figure out how they might exist. They're right there. They're right there. And so it's like the easiest explanation for craft that can operate so effortlessly in our atmosphere and out of our atmosphere in outer space. By the way, keep in mind, everybody, that UFOs have been observed operating outside of the atmosphere of planet Earth. In other words, out
right
there where our satellites and the space station and the other artifacts we have out in space are orbiting the Earth. They're out there flying around just as effortlessly as they're flying around down here. So if you have these craft that can fly around in the outer atmosphere of planet Earth or outside of the atmosphere of planet Earth in orbit, let's say, then how big of a logical leap is it to assume that they're doing the same thing in the atmosphere of Mars and around the atmosphere or in the outer space around Mars? I mean, it's not a big jump. This would not be difficult for somebody in the possession of this kind of technology that performs these kinds of technological feats to operate, to be able to traverse our solar system and enter into a base, let's say, on Mars. I mean, it just seems so strange that people want to gravitate to an extra dimensional hypothesis where you don't even have enough pieces of the puzzle to even make sense of that, because we simply do not understand an extra spatial dimension. How do I know we don't understand it? Because our brains cannot conceptualize it. It's impossible. Our brains cannot conceptualize a world that is comprised of more than 3 dimensions. It's literally impossible. You cannot imagine what a hypercube looks like, a tesseract. You can't do it. It's literally impossible. But here we are so confidently hypothesizing about an extra-dimensional world and extra-dimensional beings when you can't even imagine what a freaking hypercube looks like. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that doesn't exist, the extra-dimensional world. I'm just saying it's like the Marvel movies. It's what do we call it, a MacGuffin?
Yep,
it's like
right.
It's like a MacGuffin for Christians. To just default to extra dimensional. And I'm saying, okay, I got it. I understand that's on the table, but don't ignore the most obvious and logical conclusion here. Yeah. Okay.
It's unnecessary. We don't need 7 more dimensions to explain the basics of what we're seeing here.
How many Christians do you have to talk to that spiritualize the elder race? And you have to point out all the places in the Old Testament, even without going to the Dead Sea Scrolls, where they physically interacted with everyone.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of Christians that tend to think that it's just all spiritual. And it's like, why do you think that? The Bible doesn't say that. The Bible says that they're physical.
Well,
when they
even
get here and they interact with us.
Even some of my favorite scholars will say that angels, they assume a human form.
Yeah, I've heard that too. And it's like,
assume a human form. And I'm like, why would you put the word assume there?
Right.
So you have to accept all of the ridiculous things. If you're going to make that claim, then you need to own all of the ridiculous things that follow from that statement. So you're saying that angels assume a human. What does that even mean? Like, we're talking about genies. So they assume a physical form, and presumably with all of the organs. I mean, this physical form, is it stuffed with intestines? Do they got all the cells and everything, all the little mechanisms working in that physical form that they just popped out of thin air?
They better have something in there because they eat.
Exactly right, because they're eating and they're drinking. Where does the liquid go when they sup with Abraham? Where does the liquid go that they drink? Does it go into another dimension?
exactly.
Does it just disappear?
There's a
dimensional
very
bathroom.
multiverse.
That was handy.
Right. Yeah. So I'm always just like looking at this, like thinking to myself, where do we get these illogical notions? Why don't we just draw the most obvious conclusions? Why don't we draw the most obvious conclusions? And the answer is largely because we are still bootstrapped with medieval theology and a medieval worldview, a worldview that was largely constructed during the Dark Ages. Yeah. And we think for some reason that this is the correct, accurate view and that we must adopt it. But I don't accept it any more than I believe that foul air is the cause of most diseases. We know that's not the case anymore. So we can jettison so many of these dumb medieval ideas as it pertains to our everyday life, right?
Evil humors.
We don't believe witches fly around on broomsticks. And these kinds of things come out of the medieval age and out of the Dark Ages, rather. And yet we hold on to all the medieval thinking as it pertains to the Bible. It doesn't make any sense to me. We live in the 21st century. We are modern thinkers. We are allowed, indeed entitled, to apply our 21st century brains to what we're reading in the Bible. There's no prohibition of doing that. And so why would I not do that? And so that's why I'm always looking for an explanation that is rational rather than, quote unquote, supernatural. Now, do I believe in the supernatural, or rather, more specifically, do I believe that there are supernatural beings, or more specifically, do I believe that there is a supernatural being? The answer is yes, God. God is supernatural. He is above and beyond nature, indeed outside of it. He is outside. He must be outside of creation. He could not have created it unless he was outside of it. So does Timothy Alberino believe in the supernatural? Yes, I believe in one supernatural being.
Right. Because everything else he created, by definition, is natural.
I'm sorry?
Right? Everything else he created, by definition, in this universe is natural.
Yes, it's all abides by the laws of physics that he put into place.
Yeah.
Even his son is within creation. See, we can know the Father. How do we know the Father? There's only one way
through the Son.
Anyone can know the Father, and that is through the Son. No man has ever seen the Father at any time, right? Jesus said. So Jesus is the likeness. Jesus is the image of the Father. The only way that you could even ever begin to know the Father is through his Son, who is inside of creation. The Father is outside of creation. The only way you can know him is through his Son. It's the only way. So, and this is very elegant, really, when you think about it, because people say, well, there's so many different religions out there. And it's like a buffet, and you can choose, it's all these different paths lead to God idea. You can choose Buddha, or you can choose Jesus, or you can choose Muhammad. All of these things are similar. Well, no, that's not true, because there's something very elegant about the biblical narrative. And it is that there's only one path to God, because there's literally only one way you can know him, and that is through his express image. That's it. And the only express image is Jesus. Jesus is his likeness, his express image. Creation itself knows the Father through the Son, period. And people say, well, we can know God through what he's created. Yes, we can. And through whom did he create everything? Through the Son. Clearly.
That'll preach.
Colossians 1:15. All things were created by him and through him and for him. And in him, all things consist. So it's this really elegant, theological exposition that is rarely discussed. This notion that there is this singular supernatural being who is outside of space and time, but he has a representative, indeed his only begotten Son, who is inside of creation. And we can know this unknowable being through his Son. And it's very elegant. And so anyway, that's my little dissertation on supernatural. So do I believe in the supernatural? Yes, one supernatural being, and that is God.
He's a singular.
And that's that Colossians 1:20, where Christ reconciles the natural to the supernatural. He reconciles all creation back to himself. And I think that's the practicality of that, the reality, the elegant reality that you just described, is a perfect example of what we're trying to do with this podcast and with these conversations, and by bringing material like Birthright to light. Not that it was in the dark before, but to light in our own minds and our audience's minds, is that you don't have to. It doesn't make any sense to separate what we're reading in Scripture from the reality of our lives. That it's written to us and it applies to us 100%. It's not this other hat that we have to put on when we go read that first chapter of Colossians about Christ and who he is and what he's done and how he interacts with reality and the kinds of things he says about himself. We don't have to take our reason out in order to look at that and say, I believe that, because it's describing concepts that we've been so blinded to. But the more we look at the things that are going on around us in ancient past and now and in probably the near future, we realize that Christ is necessary. He's absolutely necessary, and none of this makes any sense without him. And that's why that's that statement that you make. There are no atheists in the end times, because you can't conceive of a reality where there's not a reconciliation between natural and supernatural. And then we were saying C.S. Lewis knew some things. Well, Paul knew some things. And he's yelling them at us through Scripture as loudly as he can and repeating them and trying to make them as clear as he can. But they're hard concepts if nobody takes the time to sit down and reflect on them as we've done this evening.
And I would add as a footnote to what I just said that Jesus, the Son of God, is also a supernatural being, because he was with the Father from the beginning. So, but the difference is the Son of God is inside of creation. Very clearly, he is inside of creation, and so it's he who shows us the Father. That's clear. He says so. So, I have this term that I use for the Son of God in my book, and it's really quite a loaded term, and I'm not sure people really understand what I mean when I use it. I refer to the Son of God as the singularity. That is how I think of him. He is the singularity, both in his uniqueness among all the other sons of God, right? The only begotten of the Father, but also in the cosmological sense. See, the initial singularity is the initiation of the Big Bang. Well, that's the Son of God in the Scriptures. So this is I don't know how I got because of the term supernatural. I wanted to clarify that. So I believe that everything is inside of our universe. I do not believe there are other universes that are separated from us by some kind of a veil. I don't believe in that. I don't think there are other universes. I do believe that there are more than 3 spatial dimensions to our universe. That's hyperspace. I do believe in that. I do not believe in alternative world theory, that there is, adjacent to our reality, a completely different world. I don't believe that either. Rather, I subscribe to what Paul says, that we see through a mirror dimly. And what I've understood that to mean is, and what it really does mean, practically speaking, is we have cataracts. So think about seeing through a mirror dimly. You're looking through a dim, dirty mirror or window or glass, right? Or we see through a glass as it's sometimes translated dimly. Well, this is precisely the condition of cataracts. People who have cataracts have this film over their eyes. They can still kind of see the world, but they see these abstract shapes, right? They see the world dimly. And this is our condition because of the fall, because of what precipitated in Eden, and of what precipitated from Eden rather. So if the cataracts, which is, by the way, is going to be taken away from our eyes, the New Testament, it says that we will see him, meaning Christ, as he is. We will see everything the way that Adam saw the totality of creation. We will perceive the totality of creation. So it's not, in my opinion, that there are other universes. Rather, there are facets of our universe which are simply imperceivable to us, like infrared, for example. There are spectrums of wave and sound that are imperceivable to us. But I think that much of this imperceivable reality around us is going to become perceivable to us at the resurrection, when we're reset to the blueprint of Adam through Christ.
That verse that you quoted, or that you referenced, when we see him as he is, that's 1 John 3. And it says, not only will we see him as he is, it says we will be like him, because we will see him as he is.
And and being like Christ, of course, we know what Christ is like, because we have examples of Jesus interacting with his disciples after he was resurrected. And he does all the things we do, right? He's sitting there on the beach post-resurrection, sitting with his body, by the way. It wasn't like there was a new body. It was his body resurrected. So what's going to happen to us? Our body resurrected. Our body refashioned, but it's our body. So much so that Jesus had the marks of the crucifixion.
Right.
So Thomas had to touch the marks of the crucifixion, the piercing, the scar in his side, to be convinced that this was in fact Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified and buried and rose again. And so this is a very good example of what I'm talking about. Is Jesus presently a spiritual being? Yes. Is he presently a physical being? Yes. But so are we right now. We are spiritual beings in physical bodies. And it's not that the physical body is bad. That's actually a heresy, this notion that the physical world, material world, is evil. The reality is that we were created to be a composite of spiritual and physical. And those two things it's not that they're not supposed to exist separately from one another. It's two sides of the same coin. And I would say that is the same condition that the elder race is in, that the angels are in. They are composites, just like we are, although they are of a higher nature. Their biology is even more remarkable than ours, whatever that means. But they're not genies. They're not genies. And so I don't know if I'm conveying how well I'm conveying this, but we live in one universe, the totality of which we cannot perceive. but it is one universe, one singular universe.
Right. Just like our spiritual and our physical bodies inhabit the same, like we're both beings. Our spiritual bodies are not members of another dimensional universal place. They're here with us, just like everything else. And it also makes sense why the enemies of Christ, the enemies of God, thought they could get away with what they did. And they thought when they crucified him that they won, because they thought that since God was outside, the Father was outside of all of this, that, you know, they could just kind of run roughshod over everything, and didn't realize the truth of what God had done with the incarnation. But like you said, one spiritual being, and then the physical creation that he's given us. And there are spiritual aspects and physical aspects, but they're all in this space, not other spaces, not spaces that we, like you said before, we can't really conceive of. We pretend we can conceive of them, and we can write stories and have movies, but we're not really understanding anything about that. And it's kind of silly that people, you know, we entertain it in a way that we try to believe like it's real.
Right.
I guess.
And I would certainly differentiate between supernatural and spiritual. Spiritual is a biblical term. Supernatural is not. Spiritual is a biblical reality. What we conceive of as supernatural is better defined as magical, and fanciful. So, and that's not to say that people say, well, didn't Jesus do miracles and stuff? Of course, I believe in all of that. And that doesn't contradict what I'm saying at all. And because, by the way, number one, Jesus is the architect. He's there building. He's wisdom in the book of Proverbs. He's there. He's in the beginning. He's the architect. He's working. Creation is being, the Father was pleased to create everything through him and by him and for him. That's the Christocentric perspective. And so, you know, it is, one would expect, having this understanding of the Son of God, that he would be able to do things that we couldn't do, because
it doesn't require magic, because he's what he's doing with the miracles is he's demonstrating the validity of who he is by
Exactly.
the authority he has to interact with the creation that he has made, and that he can work in that creation in ways that those with lesser authority can't. But when they do that in his name, then they can, or they can do similar things.
That's right.
Exactly. So it's the opposite of magic. It's working very much within the rules of creation, so long as you're working within the proper authorities, and the creation is responding to its creator and those authorities. There's no magic necessary.
Right. And so I think that what a lot of people, this is going further down this path than I intended, but I think that what a lot of people conflate supernaturalism with superstition. And again, and I think that we have many Christians tend to have a superstitious perspective that is the residue of the Dark Ages. They assume that this perspective comes from established fact, let's say, when in reality, this perception that they have is more akin to superstition than it is to reality. And there's we could go on talking about this for hours, and I don't want to put out the wrong impression. I absolutely believe in the Spirit of God and in miracles and all of that. That's not what I'm saying. And there's a clarification of this in my book, Birthright. And I don't even remember how we went down this path, but the extra dimensional stuff, I think, is what kind of led me to these thoughts. But
it happens to us all the time.
To summarize, I do believe that there is a possibility of an extra dimensional reality, whatever that means, whatever that looks like. I do fully subscribe to a hyperspatial hypothesis. So I'm fully subscribed to the hyperspatial hypothesis. I'm open to an extra dimensional hypothesis. I reject the multiverse hypothesis and the alternative world, or the alternative universe hypothesis. I reject those. We live in a singular universe, and everything in that universe is bound together by synergistic forces, whether seen or unseen. And I think that is the biblical view, by the way. And so this notion that there are other universes, I think is I think, for one thing, it's ridiculous. I don't believe that there's a lot of scientific validation for that. It's a realm of pure speculation, whereas the hyperspatial hypothesis is standing on pretty firm ground at this point.
Well, and hyperspace is very simply is just saying that there's a way of moving about our reality that we don't understand yet. There are extra spatial dimensions built into the fabric of our universe. An extra dimensional world would be a world outside of our universe. Yeah. It's a layer of the same onion, not a different onion.
Yeah, it's parallel universes.
But there may be an extra dimensional being who has facets of their, let's say, biology are the product of existing in a higher dimensional plane within our universe. That would be an extra dimensional being, and it all gets conflated. It's all kind of conflated together. So I'm open to that. I'm open to that reality. But I'm not open to that being coming from a different universe.
That makes sense.
That's what I reject, both on biblical and scientific, for biblical and scientific reasons. And of course, there are lots of scientists, there are lots of astrophysicists, theoretical physicists who subscribe to the multiverse. So it's not like that's an unpopular theory. Frankly, I think it's absurd. And there are lots of scientists, lots of astrophysicists and theoretical physicists who think it's absurd, this notion of a multiverse. So it's important for people to start to parse those ideas in their minds. And it's very confusing because they're so similar, and the delineation between them is so intricate that it's easy to cross over. But be aware of that, everyone. Be aware of the fact that when we talk about interdimensional this or that, we're likely conflating theories.
Well, and there's a lot of mixed definitions across the board. So I think that's a very helpful conversation because as we speak about these things, it's helpful for people to know what we're talking about, what we're not talking about, that when we talk about dimensional movement, we're not talking about separate or alternative realities. We're just talking about things we don't understand about the reality we live in. And the fact that we don't understand them or can't see them doesn't mean that they're not real, and doesn't mean that they belong to something foreign. It just means that
or another universe, that they come from a different universe or an adjacent world. This is a very popular conception, I think, not just among Christians, but probably among religions of all stripes, that there is this adjacent world. There's a world that's adjacent to ours, a reality that's right next to ours, but we can't access it. There's like a veil. It's a common term that's used. The veil. There's a veil separating our reality from theirs, and that would be more akin to like a different universe. And it's right there. It's right on top of our universe. It's happening at the same time, but they're distinct universes that are sort of parallel. That to me is very difficult. It's very difficult for me to conceive of that. Rather, and this will be the final thing I say on this, because it's such a confusing and complex subject. It takes a lot of talking through it, even to make sense of it in my own mind. Rather than that, the idea is, rather than there being like a veil separating my world from this world, rather I have cataracts, perceptual cataracts. It's not that it's a different world, it's just a different facet of my world that I can't see.
To put it in biblical terms, we think the Bible talks frequently of heaven, earth, and under the earth. They're not three separate realities. They happen to be physically adjacent, but it also says that Christ is recognized as Lord of all of those, and he's not the king. It's not three different realities. It's a king of its one reality. We happen to be particularly native to one aspect of it, and from what we understand from Scripture, we should expect that we're going to have a much larger and more thorough understanding of that. and as we are shaped by Christ.
And I know it's late and probably too late for this question, and this question can lead us perhaps into another conversation on another day.
Let's do it.
But here's a question for you guys to ponder. Where is the kingdom of heaven? And does it have locality? Can you get there?
Could you physically traverse to there?
If you had access to unlimited technology.
Well, and you got rid of your cataracts.
Okay. Could you get
I mean,
there?
you would have to have the perceptual ability to see into the other extra dimensional real or physical dimensions of our reality, probably. I mean, obviously, we're going to ponder this because you just asked us to. So we're going to think about this. But yeah.
And is this why Tim Alberino is in Montana? Just
I'm
adding
in
to the questions.
Hey, we used to.
I'm in Montana because Montana, as far as I'm concerned, is the best state in America. But that's another discussion. But
it is another discussion.
The idea is we know there's eating and drinking in heaven. Is that extra dimensional eating and drinking, or is it just eating and drinking?
No, it's just really good eating.
If it's just eating and drinking, then I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to suggest that you can get there.
Yeah.
If you had access to unlimited technology, you could get there. It's a place. It's inside of our universe.